Hey everyone, what's going on? So a few days ago I made this video talking about the umbrella symbolism and how it's linked up to the truth community. And I'll come back to this in a second, but the very next day I was at work and I often listen to other people's YouTube videos and things while I'm at work if I get a chance. And I was washing the dishes or something and I was listening to this video that Zach had put out, and 10 minutes later or so I had to stop. And when I went back to the video, I was reading through the comments and I noticed that somebody had left a comment talking about the points that I had made in my umbrella video. And then Zach wrote to them how I can't discern between the organic and the obvious manipulation. And, you know, it's a misunderstanding. He's misunderstanding what I was talking about in that video, because I totally understand that things are being manipulated, right? Such as, black people in the number 42. You see that all of the time with black people. Jackie Robinson, number 42. Rodney King, born on 4-2. Rosa Parks was 42 years old when she rode the bus. Bus equals 42. Her birthday's on 4/2. February 42 has the 42nd day. So on, right? I totally understand that these are being manipulated. It's very obvious because other people rode the bus before Rosa Parks rode the bus. Other black ladies rode the bus, but Rosa Parks is the one that they've programmed us to know about, right? Rosa Parks, the 42-year-old. So, and that's the same with all kinds of stories in the media. There's thousands of kids that go missing every day, but Natalie Holloway was in the news for 5 fucking years. You know what I'm saying? And it was all coded by the numbers. So that there is programming and manipulation that is going on. I'm not arguing that. Flight 77 hit the 77-foot tall Pentagon and so on. I can see through the obvious manipulation, but there's something with how the organic side also fits in to this obvious manipulation that a lot of people are missing. And I think a lot of people are missing this because even the truth community has been programmed and manipulated and influenced to a certain extent to see certain things with numbers and connect them only to some type of cabal, when there is much more that is going on with this knowledge if you really start to pay attention. And not every 201 has to mean it's the Jesuits. That's something it seems that they've programmed us with. And sure, it does connect to the Jesuits, and I'm sure that all of these stories that are in the news that are important to 201, they probably are connected to the Jesuits, but when you take a step back and you look at the umbrella symbolism and you see how the umbrella symbolism is important to mind control, and then you see how all of these things played out and how these things are connected to the truth community, like such as Dr. Paul Cottrell coming out of nowhere and reaching out to Zach about the number 201 and event 201, why Zach was in room 201, and Dr. Paul Cottrell equals 201. And then Zach went back and was looking at his notes and he found that 201 was this big number with the Jesuits, and he was following how coronavirus was linked up to the Pope and Revelation. So all of a sudden coronavirus is all linked up to 201, right? And then they can just, and Dr. Paul Cottrell also used an umbrella in his thumbnail with his video about Zach, right? So it makes me wonder within this community if somehow, they've influenced us. Same with the OKC rally. The only reason that Zach even had the OKC rally was because there was a story in the news about Oklahoma City and the OKC bombing, right? And then a couple days later, there was another story. And then he was like, all right, we're going to go to Oklahoma City. And then, a month later, the Super Bowl is like stupidly connected to Zach. Even Cooper Cup or whatever, his name's 186, the number important to umbrella symbolism. He's from Yakima, where Zach was from. I mean, then we got a story about whatever, the coach, what's his name? Sean McVay. We got that story about Sean McVay, the coach of the Rams, his father named Tim McVay. And think about Timothy McVeigh, the OKC rally. You got all them grocery store shootings that were linked up to the Super Bowl stuff. It's linked up to Joe Burrow. It was synced up to Zach's birthday. Cincinnati Bengals equal 419, the OKC rally on 419, all these things, right? It's like they influenced him to want to do this OKC rally, and then when he decided to do it, all of a sudden, all of these things are just stupidly scripted around him. And I was talking about the Rams being in the Super Bowl in November because of synchronicity I had with SpongeBob. So it's like, I'm pretty sure that the Rams were like the plan to be in the Super Bowl the whole time. And Sean McVay's father was always Tim McVay. So then we get this OKC thing, and then they put a story about Tim McVay in the news, right? They influenced all of this. And then, the Buffalo rally was next. Or, well, Zach also went to, after the OKC rally, he went to the JFK assassination site, and that's where the umbrella symbolism stems back to. But then the Buffalo rally, and that was linked to these numbers with skull and bones, and then, it was linked up to the 9/11 stuff, the 9/11 rally. Then the next day he went to Yale Skull and Bones, 3 months, 22 days after the Buffalo rally, and a bunch of stuff, right? All the grocery store shootings were all to 3/22. It was like they used us in some type of weird ritual, right? And then you look at the umbrella symbolism and you go, is this mind control? Are they programming us? Are they influencing us to do certain things? That is the question that I'm asking, and that's why I'm curious if it is actually the Jesuits who are responsible, or if it is something else in the shadows that we don't know anything about that is influencing us and using the Jesuits and such as a scapegoat. It's obvious the Jesuits and the Freemasons and the Knights Templar and, you know, Skull and Bones, it's all important. It's somehow related, at this, I think it's just a lower level, and there's something even deeper that is ruling, right? And in Zach's video, he also, I know he misunderstands it, because in this video, he's talking about how I was saying how Skull and Bones is more important than the Jesuits or something, and I'm like, no, that's just a complete misunderstanding. I'm saying that just a theory that there might be something that is above all of this, that is using these things as a scapegoat, and then they've kind of programmed us to have certain beliefs about the way this knowledge works. And then people, when you start getting programmed with a certain number, every 56 means this, every 201 means this, it's easy manipulation. It's easy to rule you that way. And when you start seeing the things that I'm talking about, that I'm going to talk about here, you see that not every 56 has to mean a certain thing. You can create your own meaning through a stream of consciousness, or by paying attention to patterns that exist within your life. And if you do this and you relate it to the news, you start realizing that the meaning of the numbers is always changing as well. There's, once again, it's through a stream of consciousness, of understanding. Also, another reason that I wonder about this is just when you look at the history of how all of the truth community really began. And, I mean, there's been certain stepping stones that have been important to this truth community, but, it's no secret when you first get into this knowledge, a lot of people get in from 9/11 and so on. And 9/11, I swear they just made that so stupidly obvious to wake a certain amount of people up, and then they still control the group. It's a small group, but they created like a conspiracy movement for a certain agenda, and I don't know what exactly that agenda is, but I think that they created that, to for a certain agenda. And if you start, after you learn about 9/11, then you start learning about, George Bush and how George Bush was in Skull and Bones, and then you start learning about Freemasonry, then you start learning about the Catholic Church, and, these things aren't secrets within this truth community, right? And it's just curious to think about why they would allow these things to be known. And it makes me wonder if there is something, in the shadows that we've never heard of before that is actually pulling the strings. You understand what I'm saying? And you go clear back to the 1800s, you got like the story about William Morgan, the guy who was going to expose the Freemasons, and his name equals 147, just like Freemason. And then you get Abraham Lincoln's letter about the Jesuits, and Abraham Lincoln, said the Civil War wouldn't happen without the Jesuits, but that letter was coded to the teeth to the Jesuit numbers, right? 8 months and 4 days before his birthday. Of course, in Civil Wars in the 84th year in the United States of America, 84, Jesuit 84. And you know the Catholic Church is important to the United States, considering the Catholic colony and Christopher Columbus and, you know, Cecil Calvert, who founded the Catholic colony, CC, right? 33. Think about, Freemasonry, how that's important with the 33 pillars at the headquarters in Washington, D.C., that are all 33 feet tall and a bunch of stuff, right? And you know that it is important to these groups because of that. But I'm just saying that I think there's something higher. And Abe Lincoln doing that. So Abe Lincoln codes his letter to the Jesuits. Also, that letter came from a book by Charles Chiniquy, C.C., like Catholic Church, so on, right? But William Morgan coded Freemasonry. They make the anti-Masonic party out of that. Then you got Abe Lincoln talking about the Jesuits. So you learn about these things. Like years ago, I've learned about some of these things. Then in 9/11 time, 9/11 they made everybody say it was an inside job, right? Inside job in Gematria. Just so happens to equal 156. The 156 prime number is 911. So they had the whole truth community saying 9/11 was an inside job, right? Once again, it seems like they controlled this, right? Then you got guys like Alex Jones that a lot of people get into. Bill Cooper was before all that, before 9/11 even. And of course, Bill Cooper died by the Jesuit numbers. And, Bill Cooper even talked about Gematria and stuff, but he didn't go as in depth as what we're talking about now. You got Jordan Maxwell. You know what I mean? And I'm not even saying these people are even bad people. Maybe they were influenced to be the people that they were for some reason, and they didn't fully understand even what they were teaching. But then you get 9/11, obviously by the numbers. Then they come out with like the Da Vinci Code. Then they come out with Zeitgeist that was all coded by the numbers. Zeitgeist completely exposes 9/11, right? And then they start, it's not even hard to find the Tim Russert video, where it wasn't a long time ago at least, where Tim Russert exposed George Bush and John Kerry for being skull and bones. And then you look up Tim Russert and you see that Tim Russert just so happens to equal 322, the big skull and bones number. And you go, man, were they doing that on purpose? Were they influencing the truth community to see that George Bush was part of Skull and Bones? It's almost like they created this movement. That's all I'm saying. And of course, though, when you get to the level of gematria within this community, right, then you start seeing all these connections to certain things. Like you'll see a story about a 58-year-old guy who died 58 days after his birthday or something. And then, all of a sudden since you've been studying it, you're ready to blame it on one of these groups. So you're like, well, that 58 has to mean Freemasonry then, because Freemasonry equals 58. And while it's not untrue, it's also not true just because Freemasonry equals 58. There's countless other things that story could have been synced up to, right? These numbers don't have they have multiple meanings. And of course, like right now, what I'm saying is, it seems like they're coding these stories to the Jesuits. I understand this with all the 201s and whatever, and they even link up to the Jesuits. But once again, just think about the umbrella symbolism, and it's like maybe, just maybe, they're doing this on purpose. So because they've programmed us with this set of numbers now, they showed us, hey, it's the Jesuits, and so now every time we see these numbers that are important to patterns with the Jesuits, we just instantly associate that. And then we miss out on all these other things because we're like, look, it's the Jesuits. It can't be connected to anything else. A lot of people don't even realize that it can be connected to anything else, it seems, in the community. It's almost like it's similar to some type of programming and mind control that they kind of guided us to see these things. And then now they know that every time we see this certain set of numbers, we're going to associate it only with this certain thing. And really, if you really start to study it, like I'm going to show here in a second, there's tons of other ways that don't have anything to do with the Jesuits that I've been decoding. And the things I'm talking about, the most random thing, the next day there'll be a news story about it. And it had nothing to do with the Jesuits, even though the numbers were the same. It still doesn't, it doesn't connect. It'll connect to both. So then you go, what is it? Is it my theme? Or is it connected to the Jesuits? Or is it connected to somebody else's theme? And I don't know. I'm just asking these questions because there's something that's going on, especially when you see the umbrella symbolism. And in this video with the umbrella, I also talked about how when the original umbrella symbolism began in 2016 and then Zach's house got crashed into, I talked about how my uncle had died in a mysterious car crash. And after my uncle died, that's when I started saying, hey man, I think it's the Jesuits who are behind all of this. And then it's interesting, with the umbrella linked up to the JFK assassination, JFK, the first Catholic president, right? So you're like, this is interesting how it links together. And as I've shown, the umbrella symbolism is also linked up to a space theme, which was another theme that I was being guided to see in 2017. The Jesuits and space, two humongous themes that I was following. And then after the Umbrella Man stuff, my uncle ends up dying, and he dies at the Jesuit University, and his name equaled 191. He died 191 days before his birthday. He was a 4th degree Knight of Columbus, and Society of Jesus equaled 191. And he died 2 months and 15 days before the anniversary of the Knights of Columbus, and Knights of Columbus equals 215. So I started thinking, man, this must be connected to the Jesuits. Then we had the Super Bowl that was all to the red and the black, synced up to the Jesuit, the Catholic theme with the red and the black and Lady Gaga. And from then on out, I was like, dude, it's definitely the Jesuits, and that year, as that year went on, everything was connected to the Jesuits. I was following this theme with Twins and how it was important to the Yankees and the Mets because they were two teams I noticed that had connections to the Jesuits, right? And the big thing was the number 84. And I thought one of them teams was possibly going to be in the World Series. They ended up playing each other in the wild card game, and the Yankees won 8-4 even. And it was like, what are the odds that they would end up playing each other in the wild card game, and then the score even is 8-4, the big number I'm following with them all year, how Jesuit equals 84. It was right after the Jesuit anniversary even. And what's even funnier too is, there was all kinds of stuff. Moral of the story is tons of stuff was connected to the Jesuits that year. And a really big one, so I was following the Jesuit anniversary actually that year in 2017. I was really following the Jesuit anniversary. And back in the beginning of June, I found this article. An article popped up on my Facebook about the guy who got the perfect showcase on The Price is Right. His name was Terry Neese. And it was an article called Urbo, or the article who wrote it was called Urbo, and I noticed that equaled 312, and that was a huge number I was following with the Jesuit theme because Pope Francis's real name equaled 312, and Ignatius of Loyola became a saint on the date 312, and a bunch of stuff. 312, this big number that was connected. I even talked about North Korea and how the Korean War lasted 3 years, 1 month, 2 days, 312, and how it was linked up to the Jesuits, and a bunch of stuff. But I saw this article on Urbo from Facebook, and it was about the guy who got the perfect showcase on The Price is Right. And I think it was while I was reading that article, all of a sudden I heard my TV. I just have the TV running, right? And all of a sudden I hear the TV say, "The price is wrong, bitch." And I look up and Bob Barker is on the TV and it's Happy Gilmore playing. And I'm like, what are the odds that Bob Barker, the guy from Price is Right, is on my TV as I'm reading this story about the guy who got the perfect showcase on The Price is Right. And I made a blog post about it and so on. And then I was following this big Jesuit theme all summer. And on the Jesuit anniversary, I got this weird phone call from Las Vegas, right? And I was like, it was from the Las Vegas area. It was, I don't know if it was like a spam call or what, but nobody was there. It was from the Las Vegas area. And nothing ended up happening on the Jesuit anniversary that year, except for that phone call. And then 3 days later, the guy, Terry Neese, started reaching out to me on my blog saying how he wanted to get a hold of me and all this stuff. And he had a bunch of stuff to tell me about how he had read my blog and he wrote a book on this knowledge and so on, or not this knowledge, but on how his experience on The Price is Right, such as how he had went on there and got the perfect showcase. And then a couple months later, his niece went on the show and she sat in the same seat and got up on the show and won a bunch of money and stuff. His name's Terry Neese, and his niece gets up and sits in the same seat and all this. But when he was on the show, he was wearing a shirt that said Las Vegas. And he also just so happened to be from Las Vegas. And the very next day after reaching out to me, we had the Las Vegas attack. And that was linked up to the Jesuits, right? And even had like Jason Aldean, who, didn't realize this until later, but Jason Aldean equals 201 even, right? That number that we've associated with the Jesuits. So it just seemed like something was guiding me to see the theme with the Jesuits. And maybe it is the creator telling me, look, these people are the ones coding stories and so on. Or maybe it's this umbrella symbolism that's important, because look at this guy named Terry Neese here. His name also equals 186, that big number that I've talked about in the last video that was all important to the umbrella symbolism. And I even messaged this guy, and he told me he'd get back to me. I mean, he wrote me a message like he really wanted to talk to me and all that, so I emailed him. And then all of a sudden he said he's out of town and he's going to get a hold of me, and then he never got back to a hold of me. And I thought, well, that's really weird. Somebody who wants to talk to me so bad, and then all of a sudden you ghost me. It's strange, right? But what are the odds? He's from Las Vegas. He wore a Las Vegas thing on his shirt. And what's even funnier is in his message, he talked about how, what was it? I can't remember what it was. He used to be I can't remember what it was. He was a weatherman or something like that. And I just pulled the message up here, but here's even my list, my phone thing here. September 27th, Jesuit anniversary. The only phone call I got the whole day. It ended up being a Las Vegas number. And then 3 days later, this guy reaches out to me, and he told me his brother-in-law was a minister at Rosebud Native American Reservation, where Bob Barker was originally from. And then he would later work in Springfield, where Bob Barker grew up. But this Rosebud Native American Reservation was really interesting, and I had pointed this out in my synchronicity with Happy Gilmore, that when I noticed that Bob Barker was from there, I think, but there was a priest that I had growing up. His name was Father Paul, and Father Paul just so happened to be a Jesuit priest. And what's interesting about him is that he died at the age of 63, 6 months and 3 days after the Jesuit anniversary, in a bathtub on the Jesuit residence at Creighton. And I thought, that's pretty weird that he would die 6 months and 3 days after the Jesuit anniversary at the age of 63. His name equals 63. And I realized this after my uncle had just been in that car wreck and died at the Jesuit University at the age of 63. And I started looking back at all the priests in my town, and one of them had died on the 63rd day of the year. Another one, his name equaled 63. And there was this other one named Father Howard Fitzgerald, and he got kicked out of the Catholic Church at the age of 63 for child molesting. And for years, I have talked about how this guy was a creepy child molester, and he even did some really weird stuff to me, and I had to go to a private meeting to his house, and it's always been this inside joke that he molested me and stuff. And I was just like, wow, there's a crazy pattern with the number 63. And then I see this Jesuit priest from my town who had worked at Rosebud Native American Reservation, where Bob Barker grew up or whatever. He was there for years before he ever became a priest in my town. And then he was a Jesuit. And I was like, man, I'm following this Jesuit theme. Now all of a sudden Bob Barker's connected to the priest that he was a Jesuit in my town, and he died synced up to the Jesuits. And just before I had that synchronicity with, the reason I knew it was important to Father Paul, the Jesuit priest, was because like 2 or 3 days before I had the synchronicity with Happy Gilmore and Terry Neese, uh, I took my daughter, I was trying to get her to go to bed, and I used to like just turn on cartoons and sit with her. And I went upstairs and she wanted to watch a different cartoon. I can't remember what was playing, but I jokingly turned it to South Park. And what's interesting about the whole thing is I had my laptop ready to go because a week before or something, my friend had told me to watch this movie called Spotlight about the Catholic priest that molests kids in Boston. And we were talking about Father Howard molesting me and whatever. And I had this movie loaded. I was going to watch this movie that night. And I went up to sit with my daughter, and I had the movie ready to go, and I was going to turn on a different cartoon for her, but I saw South Park was on the guide. And I ended up turning it to South Park, and it just so happened to be an episode about Catholic priests molested kids. And I was like, what are the odds I'm going to watch this movie about Catholic priests molested kids? And I randomly turned it to South Park as a joke. And there's an episode of South Park with, about the Catholic priests molested kids. And it turned out to be the 87th episode of South Park. It was called Red Hot Catholic Love that equals 87. And then I watched the movie Spotlight, and it was about the 87 priests who molested kids in Boston. And if you write out the word priest, it equals 87. And the priest who we've joked about who molested me and got kicked out of the church at the age of 63, his name equaled 87. And I was like, what is going on here, And even more odd is that I started a blog post about it, and exactly 87 minutes later, my friend Pam called me at like 2 something in the morning, and her name equaled 87. So, I mean, when you talk about manipulation, sure, the 87th episode of South Park, it has a gematria of 87, and then they make this movie called Spotlight about 87 priests in Boston molesting kids, and the word priest equals 87. South Park probably did that on purpose, right? I get this. They probably did that on purpose. But for all these other crazy things that happened to me with the number 87 that night, I mean, it's mind-blowing. And so I started thinking about this theme with the Catholic priests and so on, and Father Howard Fitzgerald, right? And shortly after that, the major mainstream media story just so happened to be the crash or whatever, the USS Fitzgerald in the news, right? USS Fitzgerald. And I can't remember what happened to it. It was involved in a collision. But it was only like 2 weeks after that. And I was talking all about Father Howard Fitzgerald and this priest symbolism. And then I looked it up, and the ship is actually named after a guy named William Charles Fitzgerald, who died on 8/7. Like, what are the odds of that, 8/7? And see, that's linked up to my priest synchronicity, right? The word priest is 87, but other people might have wrote something else, maybe Freemason or, whatever else. I can't think what equals 87 right now, but what are the odds that, he would die on 8/7? And I'm talking about this number with the priest and stuff in my town, all because of synchronicity. And then it links up to the news story. And even further, his wife or whatever that it's named after, or sponsored by, Betty Fitzgerald. My neighbor growing up was named Betty Fitzgerald. And before she moved into that house, my friend Clark had lived there. And I looked up my friend Clark on Facebook, and he didn't have a Facebook. He only shared one with his wife. And her birthday was the Jesuit anniversary. And then my friend Clark, his name equaled 312, that number I was following with the Jesuits, right? So, I guess all I'm saying is there was all these things that were pointing me to the Jesuits all year that year. But it's interesting then when it ends with Terry Nice equaling 186, that number important to the umbrella symbolism. And it makes me wonder, was I being manipulated to see how this connects to the Jesuits, right? And maybe it's something deeper. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying. I'm just throwing out this theory that it isn't the Jesuits, that it's something grander than the Jesuits. And there was all kinds of crazy stuff that was going on that year, right? You had the Umbrella Man make that video talking about 166, and it was 166 days after my birthday, and my uncle, his name equaled 166, and he was important to all kinds of stuff with the number 166 that I talked about in that last Umbrella video. And you know what's funny about that too? The person that wrote this comment right here, Solar Adam, Bet you can't guess what solar atom equals. 166, that big number, the second big number I was talking about with the umbrella symbolism in that video. And what's even funnier is if you look up that person, look a little closer to their picture. It's a guy on a bike holding an umbrella. It's like, what are the odds that this person who I've never seen leave a comment before, leaves a comment on Zach's video, and he has a thumbnail of an umbrella, and he talks about my video that was all about umbrella, and the number 166, and then his name equals 166. I mean, it's interesting. I don't want to call this person out and say they're a bad person, or say they're a troll, or say they're part of this manipulation. But I've had this happen to me so many times, and then it turns out that they really were a troll, you know? So who knows? I'm not going to call you out, but it's pretty interesting how you have an umbrella for your logo and your name equals 166, and then you leave this comment, you know? But I mean, there's been countless times where I've got weird stuff like this that happened, and then the people swear, oh, it's just a synchronicity, blah, blah, blah. And then a year later, you find that same person and you realize that they changed their name and all of a sudden they went from 14,000 subscribers to 0 subscribers. And then they're writing on a different video and you're like, but aren't you the same person? Like, it's crazy. It's like crazy troll stuff. So, not saying you're a troll, but that's pretty interesting. You know, how you have the umbrella and you're also on a bike, which makes me think of Joe Biden being Catholic and wrecking on his bike, and who knows, you know, but maybe it's a synchronicity, but what are the odds it's with the umbrella and your name's 166? But you know what else is interesting? In 2017, when the Umbrella Man symbolism was going on, I was blogging. There's some other themes and stuff that were going on. Twins was another big one, right? Space and the umbrella symbolism were very big. Something, and Catholic Church and Jesuits, right? All that was related. The Catholic Church, the space theme, along with the Jesuits and so on. But I had just been noticing, I noticed this big pattern with twins in the month of February. There was all kinds of stories. Like, we got a story about Beyonce, who was pregnant with twins. And there was a story about the Kelly twins at NASA, once again connected to that space theme. There was a story about twin pandas at the Atlanta Zoo, and this was like when Atlanta's in the Super Bowl. And I also read an article about George Clooney having twins, and he ended up having twins during the time of Gemini, which is the twins, you know, the Gemini and the twin, right? And then there was a story about Harrison Ford, and I was thinking about Princess Leia and how she has a twin to Luke Skywalker, and I was just like noticing this twin theme. And then the very next day, my girlfriend had an ultrasound and she found out she was pregnant with twins. And I was like, what are the odds of that, you know? And then she ended up having a miscarriage or whatever. And what's even interesting about that is she ended up having a miscarriage. Then we ended up having my first kid, Zamian, and then we had my next kid, Alistair. And there's a whole story with why his name's Alistair, too, which is interesting because it's halfway linked to Alistair Crowley or Crowley, whatever, but it linked to him at least. And that wasn't why my girlfriend wanted to do that at all, but it happened organically. But anyway, it's interesting now because I got my two sons and they look very identical. And I can't tell you how many times people ask me if they're twins. And it's just interesting, you know, that the whole, you know, originally my girlfriend was pregnant with twins and had a miscarriage, and then ends up we have two separate kids that everybody thinks are twins. So it's just interesting. But moral of the story, I was following this stuff with my girlfriend, twins, and the space theme and all that. And then on April 15th, we got the death of Isaiah Thomas, the basketball player's sister. And this was interesting because the word Thomas means twins, right? And I was also talking about the Houston Rockets a whole lot because of the space theme. And the Houston Rockets are also important to China because of Yao Ming and so on, right? So I knew there was some type of relationship. And I pointed out, the easy coding, like his sister was 22 years old, basketball's 22. He played for Boston at the time, Boston 22. And he wore the number 22 when he played for the Sacramento Kings. And his sister just so happened to die in King County, Washington. And she died in a Toyota Camry, and the word Camry means crown. And think about king and crown and King County. That's why coronavirus is so important to Seattle. That's why Queen Elizabeth just died in the year 22. You know, linked up, the word king equals 22, right? She was linked up to coronavirus and a bunch of stuff. Really interesting stuff. But moral of the story with Isaiah Thomas. So Thomas means twins. And as I looked further into the story, I noticed the car that his sister died in. I was like, holy shit, this car looks exactly like the car that I own. I mean, identical to the car that I own at the time. And my front end was even smashed in because I hit a deer the very first day I had it. Now, of course, I only had liability, so I couldn't even fix it. So the front end was even smashed in. Not this bad, but smashed in. It's like the same car. And this was a car that my girlfriend always drove. I barely ever drove this car. And I was thinking, man, think about that, the twin theme, my girlfriend, and so on. And I pointed out how China Thomas died 156 days after my birthday and how Toyota Camry equaled 156, how Boston Celtics equaled 156. And, at the time I didn't get the thing, but now I didn't understand, I didn't know Francis Bacon Gematria, right? But if you look at the Francis Bacon Gematria, it's interesting because China Thomas equals 222. And if you go from the day that she died to my girlfriend's birthday, it's 222 days. Like, what are the odds of that? And what's even more interesting is later on the date 4/30, Isaiah Thomas lost his tooth in a game, right? Isaiah Thomas's tooth got knocked out and, oh, I can't remember. His tooth got knocked out. And what was interesting is earlier in that year, my girlfriend's tooth also got knocked out. And it was the same exact tooth that Isaiah Thomas had lost. So it was like my girlfriend's tooth got knocked out like a few months before. Then China Thomas dies in a car that looks exactly like the car she drives. And then Isaiah Thomas loses a tooth 2 weeks later. And it's the exact same tooth that got knocked out of my girlfriend. It was like, what are the odds of this? You know what I'm saying? Like, and then my girlfriend's birthday is synced up to that, especially with, the Francis Bacon ciphers. And I can't remember what it is, but China Thomas, her birthday was 5/3. And if you go from her birthday to my girlfriend's birthday, it's 204 days. And if you write out my girlfriend's name, just so happens to equal 204. So her birthday was 204 days after China Thomas's birthday. And China Thomas died 222 days before her birthday, and China Thomas equals 222. It's like, what are the odds of that, So, I was linked up to that story somehow, right? It's like my life was important to this story, and you can say that story was manipulated somehow, and you could say that China Thomas was maybe murdered for the sake of basketball or something. You can have that thought, I guess, right? I mean, it's really synced up to the number 22 and linked up to Isaiah Thomas and the Boston Celtics and everything else, right? But then my girlfriend's also linked up to the same exact story. It's like, did they make this story for me to see it? Were they coding this story around me? Did they murder her because they wanted me to see the connection to my girlfriend, with the twin theme? Or did it just all happen organically? You know what I'm saying? There's no, like, it makes you question it. It's like, is there manipulation that was going on with that story to manipulate it to my girlfriend? Or is it organic? And, these are the type of things that have been happening to me even before this, but ever since it's really been ramped up even more. All of these stories that are going on in the news are connected to my life. Like, it's mind-blowing. Talk about Father Fitzgerald, then the big story is the USS Fitzgerald, and it's named after a guy who died on 8/7, linked up to the same thing I was following with my synchronicities. It's like, so did they manipulate that story just so I would see it? Or did they, and then you start getting into, maybe they did manipulate that story. Maybe that story was on purpose for a certain reason. Actually, I think that story was a lot to do with number 22 as well. But maybe the Jesuits did manipulate that story, right? But a lot of people in Gematria are trying to prove that story by just connecting the number to it when the number can have all these different meanings, you know? And I can't think of any number that 87 means that connects to a cabal off the top of my head. I know if you write out 87, it equals 139 and 58, like Freemasonry, right? So maybe that's something, but that's something what people would do. They would say that priest stuff, since that guy died on 8/7 and whatever, they would say, oh, Freemasonry, because 87 equals the same as Freemasonry, and then all of a sudden it's like everything was the Freemasons, you know, and it's like, but it's actually connected to my priest synchronicity, USS Fitzgerald, Father Howard Fitzgerald, who is the priest, right? It's linked to that. And, you know, it's not anything to do. Maybe it is connected to the way you see it, but that's the way you're following the pattern. You're understanding it by following a pattern synced up to a cabal of some sort. And I'm understanding it through a whole different path. So then it comes to the question, whose path is right and whose path is wrong? Is it really someone manipulating the story to make that 87 mean something that's connected to the cabal? Or is it because of the pattern that I was following that's in the news? So a perfect example of this, like, and I mean, I hope this makes sense to people. Like, if you go back to December, even November last year, I was following this big pattern with the Mandela effect and how it linked up to South Africa, and I thought the South African president was going to get coronavirus, and then the South African president did get coronavirus, and it was all linked up to the number 219, and it was linked up to, the horse racing and a bunch of stuff. This huge theme I was following is linked up to Nelson Mandela's birthday. And you could argue that Roman Catholic equals 219, and that Nelson Mandela was born on 18/7, like Society of Jesus equals 187. But I was following it, not connecting it to this pattern whatsoever. I was connecting it to a theme with horses and horse racing, and that's why Medina Spirit had died 219 days after the Kentucky Derby, and the Mandela effect was linked up to horse racing and to this theme with Mandela effect and horse racing were linked up, but they were linked up to the number 219. And we had all these stories that were linked up to the Mandela effect in December that year. We even got the death of Michael Neesmith, who is the guy from the Monkees, right? And when I was reading about Michael Neesmith, I found out that he actually wrote some movies. And what's funny is he wrote this movie called Time Rider, The Adventures of Lyle Swan. And the first time I ever talked about the Mandela effect in a video, which I don't really talk about it that much, like actually talk about the Mandela effect, I just mentioned a theme with it, but I think it was 2014 or something. I noticed how, I swear that I saw everywhere, it was The Adventure of Lynn Swan, and somehow it changed. And when I looked it up, you could find it everywhere where people were calling it Lynn Swan and not Lyle Swan. So I was like, that's interesting in relation to the Mandela effect. And anyway, the moral of the story is that this big theme that I was following for years with the Mandela effect, it was linked up to this movie. And the guy who wrote, this Michael Neesmith guy, is the guy who co-wrote the movie. So I was like, there has to be something important to this movie, right? And this movie stars the actor Fred Ward. And Fred Ward even shares a birthday with Michael Neesmith, right? But notice, Fred Ward would go on to die a few months later on May 8th. And I was like, what are the odds Fred Ward would die, you know? But when Fred Ward died, he died on the 128th day of the year, and he died at the age of 79. And if you write out Fred Ward equals 79. He died age 79. And he died on the 128th day of the year. And if you write out the Mandela effect equals 79 and 128. So he died absolutely connected to this pattern that I was following. that had absolutely nothing to do with the Jesuits, right? Absolutely nothing. He also died 79 days after the date 219, this other big day that I was following with the Mandela effect. Of course, Queen Elizabeth was also important to that, and Prince Andrew's birthday is 219, and Queen Elizabeth just so happened to die 219 days after her anniversary of being the Queen, which maybe I'll talk to you about in a second. Because remember, Donald Trump came out to the Queen song, "We Are the Champions," on 18/7 Nelson Mandela's birthday in 2016, and that was linked up to the Queen. And this is also the same day that I made that video about Field of Dreams with the Queen and so on, and she died completely by that connection to Field of Dreams and so on, and the number 89. But think about "We Are the Champions" and how they don't say "of the world" at the end, right? A Mandela effect thing. And Donald Trump comes out to that song on Nelson Mandela's birthday. And maybe that was all scripted, right? Maybe all of that was scripted for a certain reason. They chose that song to link up to the Mandela effect. I don't know. But all I know is this pattern I was following was not connected to the Jesuits in any way. But so Fred Ward equals 79. He dies age 79. He dies 79 days after 219, and he died on the 128th day of the year, linking up to the Mandela effect, right? But in Zach's post, Zach wrote, "Murder equals 79, and Society of Jesus equals 79. And it's like, well, okay. Like, Society of Jesus does equal 79, and murder equals 79, but just because he died age 79 and his name equals 79, does that really prove the Jesuits had anything to do with it? There's nothing in the story that involves murder. Just because it equals 79, it doesn't mean he got murdered. You understand what I'm saying? Like, there's no substance to that to me. It doesn't make sense to just write that in there because it connects. You're forcing these connections, and people are doing this all of the time in this community. They are programmed that when they see 79, that means Society of Jesus. So they code that in there, and they just believe, oh, it's the Jesuits. But it's like, is it really the Jesuits here? Or is it because of my Mandela effect theme? And what's so interesting about even saying this is the fact that Zach also wrote it here that, and then also, he wrote that, Fred Ward died on 8/5 or 5/8, but 85 means the Jesuit motto. And it's like, once again, is that really what it means? Just because the Jesuit motto equals 85 and he died on 8/5? That's kind of like the Jeffrey Dahmer thing, and whatever the town is and where it was happening, that equals 81. So then everyone writes ritual equals 81. It's like, well, there's countless rituals every single day. Or you believe they're a ritual that goes on in the news, and they don't have any connection to the word ritual. If someone dies age 20, everyone writes the word death, because death equals 20, right? But what about all these countless people who don't die at the age of 20? Like, writing that just doesn't make any sense, And sure, there is a pattern to, like, tons of rappers and stuff who die at the age of 38, and the word death does equal 38, and murder equals 38. There is this big pattern, but if the story isn't about a murder of a rapper, then it doesn't make that much sense you can say it's interesting that murder equals 38, and a lot of rappers get murdered, and there's this code of letters and, murder by numbers and so on, but it still doesn't necessarily prove it was a murder. Unless the story's about murder, it doesn't make that much sense to write in there. You understand what I'm saying? Because, think about the countless people who don't die at the age of 38 who are rappers and so on, but maybe it's just because the word rapper equals 38. You know what I mean? But once again, it makes sense because a lot of rappers die from murder. But if they didn't die from murder, it doesn't make sense to write murder in there, because that's kind of a speculation that they got murdered. It doesn't prove they got murdered, even though you really want to believe that, and it makes sense, and they probably did get murdered. You don't know for sure. You know what I mean? So it just doesn't make sense to write Society of Jesus and murder with the death of Fred Ward, especially when you see how it's related to my Mandela effect theme, right? But Zach wrote in here that his character name in the movie Tremors is Earl Bass, and that equals 58. And if you read the comments on here, somebody wrote, Wikipedia doesn't say that Fred Ward's name is Earl Bass on the movie Tremors. And if you go and look at the movie Tremors, it's true. They changed it. They keep changing it, and people have changed it back somebody changed it a while back to Earl Bass, and they even cited a source that was legit as shit, and Wikipedia keeps changing it back to Earl Bassett and not Earl Bass. And doesn't that remind you of the Mandela effect? How they're changing his name to Earl Bassett instead of Earl Bass? And, I've been talking about how Wikipedia has done that for years too. There's obviously manipulation going on. I totally understand that. They change things on Wikipedia all the time to link up with certain news events and so on. So, the numbers line up that way on Wikipedia. Even IMDb says his name is Earl Bassett. But if you go and watch this movie and look at the ending credits, it literally says Earl Bass right here. And somebody even changed it on Wikipedia and cited the ending credits of the movie even say Earl Bass. And they keep changing it back to Earl Bassett. So they want people to think his name was Earl Bassett on Wikipedia and on IMDb and everything, even though literally in the credits of the movie it says his name is Earl Bass. And once again, doesn't this prove that it's connected to my Mandela effect theme? And it doesn't necessarily prove it's to the Jesuits? You see what I'm saying? Like, people just are decoding. They're programmed to decode these things, right? You're programmed to see that everything's the Jesuits, everything's the Freemasons, this. You're built up in this community, and then you get to Gematria, and you see these numbers connect to a certain group, and now you're programming yourself. This is what this number means. So every time you see 79, now you're going to write murder, and you're going to write Society of Jesus, even though it doesn't necessarily have to prove that. You know what I'm saying? It was linked up to a whole different theme. I wasn't following it with anything else. And I don't know how people don't understand this. And people get mad at me for saying this, but it's the truth. It doesn't necessarily mean these things. It doesn't prove the Jesuits. And yeah, there are lots of things that do link up to the Jesuits. But what I'm saying is, somebody else might have a synchronicity that's connected to it. And even with Coolio dying age 59 days after his birthday, and 59 is this big number on black people. I understand they probably did manipulate that pattern, but it doesn't mean that Freemasonry equals 59. It doesn't prove that the Freemasons murdered Coolio or something, just because Freemasonry equals 59. And then you start looking into it more, and you see how there's, somebody else might have, like I said in the last video, somebody else might have found out that a week before Coolio died, that their aunt, her favorite rapper was Coolio, and they were like, "What? You like Coolio? That's crazy." And then when Coolio died, they looked up their aunt, and they found out their aunt's name equaled 59, and Coolio died 59 days after her birthday, and then they started following this other pattern that has nothing to do with Freemasonry, has nothing to do with black people, and so on. People are missing out on this deeper thing that can teach them a whole lot about this knowledge by programming numbers to themselves. These numbers have, there's more than one meaning to these numbers, if that makes sense. And I guess that's really the moral of the story of what I'm talking about here. Are we being programmed to have a certain idea of what each number means? And, from that umbrella symbolism, it just seems that they're guiding us and influencing us to have this belief that everything is the Jesuits, or every 322 means skull and bones. And sure, I get it. These groups are important, but it just seems that there's something in the shadows that's actually pulling the strings a little bit more, and they're actually manipulating our thoughts and our beliefs about this knowledge. And even though they link up and everything else, and once again, it's just a theory. It's just a thought. There's a lot of interesting things with the umbrella, but the numbers show up, the umbrella links up. I have good reason to just have this thought. I don't see how I don't have good reason. I just continually see people just decode things in this manner, and I'm like, there's no way, guys. Like, people, I get why people see it this way, but it doesn't prove what you think it proves. You understand that? And I mean, there's other things where, yeah, it's very obvious, like Donald Trump getting his coronavirus, and it was all linked to the number 56, and then what, his son ended up getting coronavirus 5 months and 6 days before his Donald Trump's birthday or something. I mean, all they do with the number 56 and so on, right? Coronavirus 56. 56, a big number to the Jesuits. We were shown that the Jesuits were important from, Event 201 and so on, right? So I get that they link up, but I'm just questioning whether we were somehow programmed a bit to start seeing the pattern with the Jesuits, and then all of a sudden they can just create a bunch of stories that have these connections, like Gavin Newsom, and you go, that's an obviously manipulated story. Wow, Gavin Newsom said that 56% of Californians would get coronavirus in 8 weeks, and 8 weeks is 56 days, and Gavin Newsom equals 56. Gavin Newsom went to a Jesuit school. Of course, toilet paper's 56, and so on, right? Mind control's also 56. How interesting is that? We talked about mind control, and mind control's 56. So, it's just, I hope people can understand that. I feel like, I don't know how better to describe it, There's multiple meanings in the numbers. And I'm just saying to be weary of why you believe a certain thing, because it seems that if you look at the history of how this truth community came to be and all these things with conspiracy, and it seems like we were kind of influenced, and this whole community has been created. And I also wonder about the end game of all this, like, so I get it. We're trying to educate people that these connections exist and that there's something controlling the world, which I totally agree with, whether it's the Jesuits, whatever, right? But it just seems that no matter what, so say we wake up 1 million people and we go and we take down the Jesuits and all these people who are responsible for coding these news stories and programming our minds and whatever else, and we start all over, but then the world still works this way, right? We're still slaves to this system. Everything still happens by the numbers. So then then maybe we start our own alphabet and our own way of communication, right? We use certain symbols, and that's how we got to be able to communicate through signs and symbols somehow, right? You got to have a language, you got to have some type of something in order to communicate. And we create this, and even though we don't intentionally create this for nefarious uses, them symbols, all of a sudden everyone's getting programmed to understand a certain symbol the same way in order to communicate. And then once again, it leads you back to the same thing, because now that symbol has a certain meaning to a majority of people, and the world still works this way for whatever reason. It's like, it doesn't solve anything. Like, the only way we're going to solve this is to understand more of how this is being done and why the world works this way. Because the world obviously operates on this code that exists all around. Unless it is all just the Jesuits just controlling the whole world. They're literally watching me every single day, and they're making sure my TV has a Happy Gilmore on it while I'm looking at an article about The Price is Right. That doesn't seem to be true. It's definitely bigger. It seems like it is. We live in a matrix type world. So no matter what we do, we're still going to be a slave to this world. We're still a slave to these numbers. And then when you start really thinking about that even deeper, just think about it. And this is just a thought, right? But just think about it even deeper. Maybe whatever controls this world, we talk about the organic side all the time. Maybe these people have figured out how this knowledge works. But then when you really think about it, it's like, even if they are purposely changing stuff to manipulate the world, isn't that kind of the ultimate plan? Wasn't that supposed to happen? That these people figured it out and they're supposed to use it to their advantage? You know what I mean? Like, there just seems to be this ultimate plan, like we can't escape it. We need to learn like what this we need to learn like why we live in a system that is coded by numbers and coded with this knowledge. And no matter what we do, whether even if we try to beat the system. I know I have a blog post on here somewhere where I talked about how I went to the casino one night and I charged my phone to I can't remember what the exact number, but I charged my phone to 62%, and I waited until 6:02 before I went in, and I put $62 in, and I made sure to play a game that had something connected to the number 62, and then I ended up winning, and the machine just shut off. I won $400 some dollars, and the machine just, the screen went black and whatever. It's but all of that probably was still happened by the numbers, you know what I'm saying? So I was manipulating the code, and it seemed that me manipulating it was just something I was supposed to do anyway, you know what I mean? That was already part of the plan. For me to try to do that, it was part of the plan for me to do everything. So it's I just don't think even taking down a cabal or whatever is going to solve the problems of the world. We need to figure out more about this knowledge, why the world works this way. If we need to figure out how to use this knowledge or rid the world of this knowledge. But we need to learn a lot more about it before we can really solve the issue. Maybe there's a real good reason that it's going on. And, these are the questions that I've had for years studying this knowledge. And then at the same time, it's I see all these synchronicities, like Aaron Judge getting a 60-second home run in the game where the Yankees get their 60-second loss and their 99th win, and he wore number 99, right? And then, you look at, it was October 4th, which was Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment. His name was Aaron Judge, right? And, but what I'm saying is, there might have been somebody in this world who had a court date and the judge died yesterday. You know what I mean? And they might have looked at the judge's birthday, and the judge died 62 days after their birthday, and the judge was 62 years old. And they're and look, this is the same day Aaron Judge got his 60-second home run, and the Yankees got their 60-second loss, And I mean, and this is the type of stuff I'm talking about all the time. And then you go, man, is God really why would he be doing this? Why would the creator be coding this judge to die just so I can see the Aaron Judge story? And why would he connect it to that? What kind of sick joke is this? There's something more to be learned with how these synchronicities link up to these news stories. But even most people don't even see how these synchronicities link up to the news stories, because they're so programmed with certain numbers that they can't even see past how their life is connected to these other stories, Because everything in the world's related. Everything's interrelated. And, there's just lots of questions. I have lots of questions about this knowledge. I've been studying it for so long. And, everybody thinks they know what they think they know about it. But I'm just here saying, hey, I don't know everything about this knowledge. And I want to believe that everything's the cabal, but I don't think that it is. It just, there's something greater. There's something more to this knowledge. And obviously I see the manipulation, but once again, maybe that was all part of the plan to begin with. That there's lots of things to think about with this knowledge. I mean, even stuff like yesterday, right? Yesterday, Derek had started the new Gematrinator calculator, right? The updated Gematrinator calculator and so on. And it's interesting because 2 days ago, wasn't it? I don't know. Don't know my days anymore here, but the day after Derek changed the Gematrinator, and this is right after Zach revamps the website or changes the Free to Find Truth website, right? So then Derek comes out the website. But the very next day, I'm at work, and the people from Seneca show up and they decide they're going to update our computer system and our register. So now our register is a whole different format. The buttons are a little bit different. It's hard to get used to. And I'm like, the Gematrinator just does this the day before all this happens. Like, all this happened for a reason, There was a reason that was telling me this, It's like, it's just crazy. This is how synchronicity works. It's like, what are the odds that Gematrinator updates and I go to work the next day and they run a big... I've worked there for 6 years and this is only the second time they've ever updated it. And my boss and nobody knew that these people were going to come and update it. And they were only supposed to come and fix a pump, a gas pump, and they ended up updating the whole system. And now it's all like the color scheme's different. It's harder to use. You know what I mean? It's just, it's crazy. But I'm actually going to leave the video here. I'll probably make a separate video when I get a chance. But this umbrella symbolism is even important to like the Miami Dolphins and Teddy Bridgewater. Because if you go back to 2016 when the umbrella symbolism was going on, I talked all about Teddy Bridgewater and how Teddy Bridgewater is born on my birthday. And I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, or I used to be, And my uncle gave me that Miami Dolphins jersey before he died. It's all linked to the Miami Dolphins. And, Rihanna's even important to the umbrella symbolism. Rihanna born on the 51st day of the year. All that stuff back in 2016 was linked to Super Bowl 51, connected to the Miami Dolphins. You got Teddy Bridgewater. Of course, the Bridgewater shooting in 2015 was linked up to that news reporter shooting, right? The Bridgewater news reporter shooting that was linked up to the movie They Live. And this year, on November 4th, it's going to be the 34th anniversary of They Live coming out. And, of course, the number 34 is a number I've been following with the movie They Live for years. And now it's going to be the 34th anniversary, but it's very interesting that Teddy Bridgewater he's now going to be the quarterback since Tua got injured and so on, and he plays for the Dolphins, and the Dolphins just lost on Thursday night even, September 29th, and if you go back and look at my blog post from 2016, I talked about how the Dolphins played the Cincinnati Bengals on September 29th on a Thursday night game in that same year, and it was all about the number 22, and now we're here in the year 22. Of course, in relation to Neptune and Rihanna and so on, and my uncle being born on Neptunalia and a bunch of stuff, it's even more interesting because the Dolphins are associated with that too, with the Triton and so on, so. And the Vikings are also having a good season. Teddy Bridgewater played for the Vikings that year. There's some crazy stuff. I think it's pointing to the Rams a lot. But the Vikings and the Dolphins are also very interesting with it. So, and you also got Matt Ryan, who plays for the Colts now. Matt Ryan was, all the umbrella symbolism was linked to the Colts and Andrew Luck and so on. And then Matt Ryan, the quarterback of the Falcons, ended up making the Super Bowl that year. So, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm really tired. I have to work tomorrow. Show up at... I'm going to try to get there about 9, 13, 12 tomorrow, whatever. I shouldn't say a specific number because then everyone's going to think I said it on purpose, but I literally show up to work like 10 to 15 minutes late every single day. They never say anything because they know that it doesn't matter. So, but there's just so many things. The Mariners made the playoffs for the first time since 2001 when they had 116 wins when the Yankees upset them 1 month and 11 days after 9/11, the day leaving 111 days of the year, and all kinds of stuff. So, we will see. I still think there's something important to the Astros and the Mets, though. And it's interesting that the Dodgers had this really good record, and they ended it with 111 wins, synced up to New York. New York's 111 at Gematria. So we will see. What else? Yeah, I'm just going to make a separate video, but for real. Hopefully I'll make it on Friday. But So I actually have a real day off on Friday. I don't have to DJ or anything. So I'll leave it there. I just wanted to get this point across. The whole point is that I understand manipulation exists, but there's something with the organic side that is related to it that lots of people are missing. And it also just seems that we're being programmed with this umbrella symbolism somehow and being influenced. And, there's a lot to pay attention to. So hopefully that explains it a little bit better. But if not, then what do you do? So have a good one. Peace.